FUE, or follicular unit extraction, is gaining a lot of popularity. And the FUT, or the follicular unit transplantation, refers to another method of removing donor hair, which is a strip harvest from the back of the scalp. So these are two ways that donor hair can be obtained for hair transplantation. All they refer to, again, is just the removal of the donor hair and not the rest of the procedure, which is how the hair is transplanted into the recipient areas. So what we found after interviewing many patients, we got together a list of their most common expectations, and then I found that the things that seem to be the most important to a person who wants the FUE procedure would be one, maybe confidentiality. For confidentiality, it might mean that they don't really want to have any scars that are visible through their scalp because they like to wear their hair really short. Maybe it's their hairstyle they prefer, or maybe it's just the way their hair grows naturally. Even if it's a little bit longer, a linear scar might be visible through their hair into their scalp. So that might be important from a confidentiality standpoint. From a comfort standpoint, patients that want to feel like they're worried about pain after surgery and so forth, a follicular unit extraction, FUE, recovery is typically going to be less uncomfortable or less painful than having the strip removed. So there's no sutures to be taken out, and the patient seems to recover faster from that. As you can see from the photo here, the one on the left shows the scalp appearance immediately after an FUE procedure is performed, and the one on the right shows it 6 days later, which shows a fairly quick recovery in terms of how the scalp looks. Not very conspicuous, even with short hair, compared to somebody who might have a linear scar, and those sutures and so forth with short hair would be much more easily visible. One additional area of added value for an FUE is that the entire donor area becomes expanded. By that I mean that if you look at this photo, you'll see that the typical donor area goes from the sides and the back of the scalp in the central part for strip harvesting. But for an FUE, we can expand that to include higher margins up in the parietal scalp here, and in the back and in the occipital scalp. We can harvest some grafts from above and below the typical areas because we're not taking them out in a whole strip, we're removing them one at a time. So it allows some harvesting of hairs that might be used, for instance, up in the hairline. If you need some softer, finer hairs, we can find those back down in the lower scalp or behind the ear. Or if we're doing an eyebrow transplant, maybe we want to get some shorter, finer hairs for that. So we can be a little more selective in terms of picking out hairs with FUE versus FUT procedure. So going back again to the same conversation regarding patient expectations, a patient that might prefer to have a strip harvest for their follicular unit transplant or FUT procedure might be somebody who needs a larger number of grafts removed at one time. So somebody who's a Norwood 5, 6, or higher is going to need 2,500 or 3,000 grafts in a single procedure. And doing that many follicular unit extractions in a single day is a real challenge. And so typically an FUE procedure that it might be stretched out over 2 or even 3 days to get that many grafts in. But for an FUT procedure, you can do that all in one day without any problem. So that's one reason why somebody might prefer to do that. So the expectation there would be for convenience. It's more worthwhile because it requires less time for the patient to be able to have the procedure and then kind of move on with their recovery. And other patients find that the economics of the process are better for them. It's a better value because typically an FUE costs more. There's a premium charge for that procedure versus the strip harvest method, which requires less time to produce the grafts. So they might find it's a better value. They can get more grafts for the same amount of money and get better coverage that way by doing an FUT versus the FUE procedure. I think that in general, the kind of grafts that are produced by both methods can produce excellent results. And I think that the transplantation method is totally independent of what's done as far as the harvesting method goes. One of the other things that's important to note too is that an FUE and an FUT procedure don't have to be mutually exclusive. There are times when on a strip harvest patient that their scalp isn't loose enough to be able to get as many grafts as we'd like to get for the coverage that we're aiming for. So we might remove some of the grafts using a strip, and then some of the others are removed using an FUE. So we're able to get a better harvest, and there's less opportunity for causing damage to the donor area by creating too much tension, which results in a thick scar, etc. So we can be creative with these. There's a lot of different things that can be done, so they're not mutually exclusive. So it's important to note that working with a practitioner, a transplant physician that is trained in both of these methods would be really critical for the patient to help them make a good decision one way or the other.